So I was hoping that on this 100-year anniversary of Mussolini's march on Rome, I was going to have something brilliant and fervent to say, but I'm just not feeling it, not really passionate right now. And, that's fine because one thing he has really taught me is that when he was hanging upside down and people are using him as target practice, that was actually a greater moment than when he was giving speeches and people were cheering over him, because it makes him resemble that naked guy that's nailed to a cross who's crowned with thorns, who saves the world by freaking dying humiliated and dying as a criminal and hated. And whereas Mussolini was not innocent, but he actually accomplished so many good things that nobody really remembers anymore because he entered that alliance. And it's really strange that people are so quick to forget the fact that he was actually the first person to stand up to Adolf Hitler with his military and try to enter on the side of the Allies, trying to stop the annexation of Austria, okay? And the problem was he called upon America, Great Britain, anybody, please help me stop the annexation of Austria, kind of like he was the enemy of Germany in World War One. He was going to be the enemy of Germany in World War Two and this other war as well. But the problem was they didn't respond to what he was calling for, and Hitler, instead of invading Italy, just sent a bunch of weapons to Mussolini's enemies in Africa. And then Mussolini proceeded to stall the annexation of Czechoslovakia as well. So he was actually the biggest opponent of Hitler originally, okay? And then Mussolini really had a reason to be very scared because he saw Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin enter into an alliance. The Soviets were like the freaking arch enemies of fascism, and both go by the name socialist. And the Nazis are the National Socialists, and then Mussolini is very anti-socialist, and then of course the USSR, the socialist states, all that. But of course Nazis are not different than socialists. But anyway, what he was realizing is that now he's really screwed because now the Nazis and the Russians are in an alliance. They both attacked Poland at the same time. Poland is fighting a war on two different fronts. And then after Poland, some other countries fall to the Nazis. The British lose all of their battles and retreat to Great Britain. And then as France was being defeated by the Blitz through France, it was very clear France is going to fall. And so basically, Hitler's basically saying, you can be the Caesar of a Roman Empire and we'll even give you some of this land and not let it all fall to us. Or your whole country is going to fall just like all of these other countries. And he put his hand on Rachel's shoulder and he said, essentially only Great Britain is left. If you think I'm going to join those weak English, you are mistaken. And I'm going to be dragged into this war one way or the other. But he was in power for almost 23 years. And it is really an amazing thing that he marches on the capital of a first world cradle of democracy with nobody voting for him, without any government experience, without any qualifications. And the prime minister calls for a state of siege. It calls for the military and the police to help him stop the black shirt fascist march on Rome. And somehow, overnight, he becomes prime minister, and there's no reason, because not only has nobody voted for him, but there's no reason why they should have believed that he could follow through with all the promises he was making about creating jobs and stopping crime and, defending religion, putting prayer back into schools, bringing unity, solving the problem that the Bolshevik infiltration and the communist infiltration of Italy was causing, and making Italy a lot better than when it was a democracy. And all these other things he's promising didn't make any sense because he was not educated. He was kicked out of school for stabbing students, and he was also a street fighter, a sword jeweler, did not have a good reputation, had a criminal reputation, and he was just working he had a a newspaper that he was selling. And so there was just no reason to believe that put this guy in power. Like if somebody wanted to be the president of the United States and they become president overnight, promising all kinds of things as the youngest president in American history, and nobody's voting for them, and they have a criminal history, and they're making all these promises of what they're going to do for America, and then they march on the Capitol, and the president declares a state of siege, calls upon the American military and police to stop this person who's marching on their Capitol. We would not think that person is going to become president overnight, and the military and the police and the government all going to fall to this person overnight. We would all say that is a freaking joke, okay? That is, we wouldn't believe it. In fact, the streets of America were actually filled with these fascists celebrating the Mussolini's March on Rome, but that's essentially what happened, and all of the things that he promised before World War II, when he was dragged into that war, he actually accomplished, and he was actually a very good friend of the Jews who were really helping him with his fascist party. His Jewish lover that he shared a bed with for 20 years was very, very helpful originally with his March on Rome and a lot of other things, because fascism actually began with the Jews in ancient Israel, with a man whose name is the meaning of Mussolini, and both Mussolini and him both loved and married a woman named Rachel, okay? And there's some other things about that too, but because the ancient Israel, it was militant, it was patriotic, it was extremely religious, even more than like Mussolini's form of fascism was like lenient compared to like ancient Israel, where fascism began with the Jews, okay? And the church that Mussolini created, independent Vatican City State, that calls itself the New Israel, okay? And that symbol, okay, so JFK belonged to the Knights of Columbus, and there's a lot of similarities between him and Mussolini, which I'm not going to get into, but the Knights of Columbus used the symbol for fascism as their symbol. It was a religious symbol. It's also a symbol for like the Roman government. And so he had a lot of Jews in the highest ranks of his original fascist party. He had a Jewish lover helping him very much. And he had nothing, there was nothing, he thought anti-Semitism was very stupid. And when he finally had to write those laws, he thought the laws were very stupid. And it's actually common knowledge that it's in the Wikipedia encyclopedia that, when he made those laws, he said these are very stupid laws. He thought he had to do it to save his country. It's like a survival instinct. Sometimes if you are a parent and you have children and you want to go home and provide for your children, you might do things that really go against your conscience to save your life so you can provide for your children and maybe save your children as well, okay? And that's kind of what he was doing in that situation. And but Mussolini was originally the bigger Zionist than most Jews, okay? He wanted to create the nation of Israel for the Jews to go to in Palestine after his conquest of Ethiopia, turning to the Jews in America for help with financial support for creating Israel in Palestine. And he ran into a lot of stumbling blocks with that as well. But anyway, if you're wondering about the Joker's outfit, the bride of the Joker, Harley Quinn and Rachel, they both have name etymologies for the two brides of Jacob, and Mussolini means Jacob. And the woman who shielded him from bullets and hung upside down with him, her title Mistress of Mussolini. Okay, Mistress is one of the definitions of the name Leah. And Harley means hair and Leah, like bunny and Leah. And then Quinn, there's some, I'm not going to get into that, but and then Rachel was the person that Batman really loved. And so Rachel and Leah essentially hated each other, and Leah basically stole the position from Rachel that Jacob made himself a slave so he could get with Rachel, and then Leah stole that position. And anyway, Rachel and the woman that died with Mussolini, they both really hated each other, but Rachel Mussolini actually realized that this woman that was going to die with her husband, making that sacrifice, was a real true friend who was making a sacrifice that Rachel had too many responsibilities that she could not make that sacrifice to be there, shielding him from bullets when people are getting ready to kill him, okay? And and so she really did not like this woman because this woman was like younger, she was a lot more pretty, and no woman, if you're married to a man and you've got this good looking female that wants to be hanging out with your husband all the time and getting that attention, you're gonna really not like her. But when she realized how much this woman was willing to be his true friend, lay down her life when like everybody hates this guy, including people that used to really really want to serve him and love him, even people that maybe secretly like him do not have the courage to really publicly be his friend at this point in time, she's willing to like say, no, I really want to die for him and stuff. And she's like half his age. He's not the young, handsome street fighter and sword dueler he used to be, not giving these great speeches that everybody's cheering about. She realized there are some very heroic qualities in this young lady. Nobody's going to appreciate her uh, because a lot of Christian women who make heroic sacrifices to be martyrs for Jesus Christ are expecting a reward in heaven or something like that. Or they are, or like Mother Teresa going into the slums to hold a leper. She sees Jesus in that leper and she believes she's going to be rewarded for all eternity for that. But here, this woman, there's this despised leper that she's going to shield him from bullets and be hung upside down with him as he's used as target practice. And she's not expecting any reward because her relationship with him is not even blessed from a Christian point of view. And he's considered a monster now, even by the church that he served more than like anybody in Italy and created Vatican City State. They don't even want to give him a Christian burial. And so she's going down in history not as a martyr, but as a despised woman that no one loves, no one feels sorry for, no one thinks is a hero. So she's not doing it for a good reputation, and she's not doing it for any reward in heaven, and she's being hated and despised and laying down her life to shield this man from bullets out of pure love. There's no reward in it for her in the next life or anything like that. She just really sees something. She really loves this man so much she wants to offer him the support of being with him and dying with him and shielding him from bullets with her body shouting no. And most women are not going to shield a man from bullets anyways. Usually that's the guy that's shielding the woman from bullets. But it's a very interesting thing because the man in the scriptures who fought with God and won and all that stuff, that was the feast of St. Louis de Montfort where he was executed. And it was St. Louis de Montfort who's the only saint that really glorifies like the criminal activity of Jacob as the contender with God who steals from his father the blessing that belongs to Isaac, and then lies and deceives and manipulates because he's doing everything to please his mother, like has this idolatrous Norman Bates type criminal relationship with his mother, Rebecca. And that's actually what causes him to steal from his father, Isaac. And St. Louis de Montfort compares Isaac to God the Father, and Esau's always trying to please God the Father. Jacob's always trying to please Rebecca, which he compares like the Blessed Virgin Mary, the Queen of Heaven. And I've come to realize there's a lot of these figures in heaven that can meet that description as well. But basically, Jacob had a totally female-dominant spirituality, and he had no loyalty to God or the male superior that God placed over him, but all this loyalty to this female. And so she arranged for him it was all her planning, and he took the credit for her work. She got him the blessing, and then he moves on to commit these multiple crimes that he gets blessed for, and then gets in a physical fight with God, fights with God, and essentially wins. And so St. Louis de Montfort is the only saint I know of who actually glorifies that kind of behavior, because it looks really, really bad. And it looks very idolatrous to be placing a female ahead of God and ahead of everyone, especially when you're saying the woman that prefigures this female is actually a very rebellious woman who's telling somebody to break multiple of God's commandments. And you're comparing the man that she is fooling and tricking and deceiving and manipulating and getting him to steal from. You're comparing that man to God the Father. St. Louis de Montfort is the only saint I know of that would ever do something like that. And he's the one who said in the end times, the people that follow his devotion are Jacob. He said the elect are Jacob. So then Mussolini, whose name means Jacob, who marries Rachel, and then hangs upside down with someone whose name, well, whose title of her vocation and relationship with him is the meaning of the name Leah of Jacob's other bride. Okay. Well, that she dies with him on the feast of Saint Louis de Montfort. Okay. And Saint Louis de Montfort was like, I don't know, his book really set me on fire. There was something very, very divine about it. I knew it was like a secret that like very few people will understand, and it doesn't even sound like it's a true story. It doesn't sound authentic. It doesn't even sound holy. And it kind of sounds a little bit evil, and it kind of sounds a little bit scandalous, and it kind of sounds a bit idolatrous, and it kind of sounds like almost like that. God only knows, like, you know, I don't want to say what I was gonna say, but it like his relationship with Rebecca, it was a really like not a good relationship. It should not have been blessed. It was a it was rebellion. It was stealing from someone who works a lot harder for that blessing, for someone who is making a lot more sacrifices, doing a lot more impressive stuff, doing a lot more of the things that are going to make a person meritorious to deserve something like that. And then somebody moves in who's just pleasing this woman who is essentially telling him to lie and steal and deceive and manipulate and take credit for stuff that he hasn't even worked for, and then go on, and then he goes on and commits violence against God, and he earns the name contender with God, and God says, you have fought with God and you have won, and all this, so it really, I was able to read that book from St. Louis de Montfort and say, this actually appears very wicked, but I'm really convinced this is actually really holy, despite how wicked it actually appears. It's a very sacred, holy thing. And it became a book I really liked. I said, I want this to be my life. So when I found out Mussolini means Jacob, and then the Rachel coincidence, and then, he dies with someone whose title is the meaning of the name Leah, and then of course married to Rachel, on the feast of St. Louis de Montfort. And he says on that feast day that he's going to return to head a greater nation in need of a leader, and the communists are going to feel his arm. Well, that's interesting because he was accused of being a figure who is also supposed to be a contender with God, who has a woman who rides the beast, okay? And that woman is supposed to be Inanna, who descends into hell like Jesus, hangs from meat hooks like Mussolini, and she rises from the dead on the third day before Christianity ever existed, and her name also is Ishtar, which Easter, which celebrates the resurrection on the third day, was originally celebrating her, who hung from meat hooks like Mussolini. Well, he went missing from the grave on the third day because somebody said the ghost of Mussolini told them to dig up his corpse on the third day to mimic the resurrection of Jesus Christ, after he said he was going to return to head a greater nation in need of a leader. And he put a big obelisk in honor of the Egyptian sun god Ra, and instead put the name Mussolini on the obelisk, and put a bunch of biblical messages beneath it and coins with Mussolini on it. Well, Ra, the sun god, he has an all-seeing eye that are like women that fight these battles for him and stuff like that. And so Jacob's spirituality is a very female-dominant spirituality, okay? And so that is essentially like, Rebecca was like his shield, saying, "Let the curse and punishment for Jacob's sins be on me, not on him." And so Clara Petacci was like shielding him from bullets, okay, kind of taking some of that curse and punishment for his sins upon herself because she was innocent, taking the curse and punishment of his sins to die with him, shouting no. And so it basically is like St. Louis de Montfort's prophecy is actually coming true in Mussolini. He's like the prefigurement of like people that follow his devotion of like this female dominant, the certified queens of heaven who represent like Rebecca, Rachel, Leah, whatever, that they are okay, so Rachel has a lot in common. Okay, so Rachel and Leah in the Old Testament is kind of like mixed roles with the relationship between Mussolini and these two women. They both have a lot of the different mixed characteristics between Rachel and Leah of the Old Testament, okay? But they both were very useful. Mussolini knew that he really needed Rachel, and in the Old Testament, Rachel was really beautiful, whereas Leah was not so beautiful. In this particular case, Mussolini knew he really needed Rachel. She was not very good looking, but the other person who has a lot in common with Leah was really attractive, and it turns out they were both very, very necessary. And when Mussolini needed to marry Rachel, and she turned down his wedding proposal repeatedly, he realized he was going to sacrifice to get Rachel more than Jacob sacrificed, made himself a slave to get Rachel for 14 years. Mussolini made a bigger sacrifice. He decided, if Rachel doesn't marry me, I'm just going to drag her to hell with me. So he found her dancing with her boyfriend, snatched her out of her boyfriend's arms, and begged him to finish or to fight him or something. He finished the dance, and then he drags her to a cab and takes her to her mother's house. And her mother says, "Benito, I'm going to call the police if you do this again." And he says, "Right." He leaves the room and he returns with a loaded revolver pointing at her mother. And he says, "There's 6 bullets in this revolver. I'm putting one of them into Rachel. I'm putting the rest into me." And essentially, he's going to take her to hell with him if she doesn't agree to marry him right now. And within 2 minutes, Rachel's basically just like, "Mother, I've loved Benito since I was 7 years old. I guess I didn't want to marry him, but this is what was necessary to push me to the brink." And within 2 minutes, they were engaged. That was how that marriage succeeded, okay? It could have gotten him thrown in prison for a long time. It could have gotten him killed and Rachel killed. But, the thing is, it turned into a very wise move on his part, because Rachel was the one who actually was recognizing that none of these documentaries about Mussolini are actually accurate. None of the things that anybody's saying about him. There's this huge campaign to uproot all the good things he's done. And she said, "Why don't I just write a book and say I'm not going to whitewash him? He's done some very bad things. I mean, the way he married me, look at that. If I was trying to whitewash him, would I be saying that the guy did that so that I would be basically forced to marry him or die, kind of thing, So he had some very evil qualities, but he did some enormous good things that nobody gives him any credit for. And, he the amount of Jewish people that he had in his original fascist party, and his Jewish mistress, and the only dentist he chose to see was an Orthodox Jew, and his household was open to Jewish children. He was actually a lot further ahead of most Roman Catholics in his acceptance for the Jewish people, not telling them, "Oh, you have to accept Jesus," or any of this other stuff. And so, so she just chose to write a book and, talk about how much he loved St. Francis of Assisi, how he was responsible for St. Francis of Assisi becoming the patron saint of Italy, how he was responsible for putting crucifixes on the walls in public schools at a time where Italians didn't really want to pray anymore and stuff like that. But then when he became prime minister, he was able to do all kinds of things that Catholic saints tried in vain to do. Like Catholic saints have tried to create independent Vatican City state, and the Italian government never would have wanted that. try to put prayer back into schools and stuff. The Catholic saints never could have done that. So there were a lot of things that even the holiest Catholic saints could not have accomplished that were very good for that Italy and for the church and stuff like that, that Mussolini was able to do a better job, be more valuable than really holy saints, even though he wasn't really that holy. And there were certain pieces of him that were kind of evil. Some of him was kind of like a monster. Some of him was kind of really scary. He could be very violent, a street fighter, a sword dueler, and of course, he was with a lot of women. And so those are not good qualities. Those are not holy qualities. But there was another side to him as well that really did a lot to try to make people's dreams come true, labored a lot more than a lot of people would have to create jobs and to give to people. Like, for instance, he refused to let himself and Rachel have luxury or anything. For instance, when his house was raided and people were searching for items that might be valuable, they thought his wife was a peasant, not even his wife, because she was wearing a peasant's apron with some eggs, and there was nothing of value, no jewelry, no fur coats, nothing like that, no yacht, nothing really expensive. He chose to live off the newspaper that he was making money off of, that he was surviving from before his rise to power, and then giving away all of his money as prime minister away to all these other causes. And he made very short work of the mafia. He united people, created a lot of jobs overseas, created colonies overseas. And here's another thing. He became a big slave abolitionist like Abraham Lincoln, the biggest slave abolitionist of the 20th century. And in fact, in 1922, Abraham Lincoln, I believe it was 1922, it was 5 months before Mussolini's march on Rome, the Lincoln Memorial was created, where Abraham Lincoln his arms are resting on these two symbols for fascism, many rods bound together to make an unbreakable fasces, I think is how it's pronounced. Okay, so the symbol for fascism. Okay, and he became a slave abolitionist like Abraham Lincoln. And so and Abraham Lincoln is celebrating unity. Instead of one state, you have many states bound together to make this really strong, unbreakable fascist symbol for fascism, as well as slave abolitionists. And Mussolini wanted to be a slave abolitionist like Abraham Lincoln, and he successfully became a slave abolitionist like Abraham Lincoln, okay? And sometimes to abolish slavery, you have to do some pretty ugly things, like kill a lot of good people and with the bad people, or there's some very good people that might be slave owners. I mean, in the Old Testament, there were some very good people that were slave owners. King Solomon was the wisest king of Israel, and he had hundreds of concubines. A concubine is basically a sex slave. That's one of the uglier forms of slavery, is when you're keeping a woman as a slave who's your sex slave and stuff. So, there might be some people that are even good people that are actually not, that are actually fighting on the side of the people that are, in favor of keeping slaves and stuff like that, because in the Bible, slavery was a very accepted practice. But Mussolini chose to be a slave abolitionist, and he chose to also be a Zionist and want to create ancient Israel for the Jews in Palestine. And he hung upside down, being used as target practice. And he's always taught me, Matt, that's where glory really lies, is he resembles the crucified Christ. And in Shinto, which is the female dominant religion, where a woman is considered greater than any male entity, and the creator wants this woman to be greater than her maker, that religion has a festival that's celebrated in Buddhism as well, called the Obon Festival, which means to hang upside down. And Emperor Hirohito loved collecting butterflies, and it made it difficult for him to be a statesman because he had this obsession with butterflies and stuff like that. and they thought this is very eccentric. Well, you know, a caterpillar hangs upside down to become a brand new creation that does not resemble its former self. Okay? And so on the feast of, or on the birthday of Hirohito, he hangs upside down. And I called him Benito the butterfly because I believed he was a new creation. Okay? And so it's like he's the emperor butterfly. In fact, on the birthday of Benito Mussolini, I kid you not, I went to Capitol Hill and I found a dead emperor butterfly on the sidewalk, and I used to tape it to my cardboard panhandling sign, and for like good luck or something. So anyway, October 28th, 1922 was the miraculous march on Rome. And it really was a miracle that someone like him could become prime minister overnight when he's making all these promises and not showing any evidence that he could follow through with any of that. Youngest prime minister in Italian history, no government experience or qualifications. Overnight, he's got control of all that. And next thing you know, he's turning a democracy into a dictatorship and then recreating the Roman Empire. And then all those promises he's making are all coming true. It's quite an unbelievable thing. And most people are not aware of it because the good things he's done, the praises he's earned from Nobel Prize winners like Tagore and Gandhi, and the good things he's done for the church and stuff, the church would be totally silent about that. The church doesn't want to give him credit for creating Vatican City State or anything like that. And a whole bunch of other things. You would never actually realize he was actually a miracle worker. And a lot of his abilities, would come from like these seances. He would summon spirits that people would say like it would actually cause like furniture to walk around in the room and knock things over, and weird smells to come into the room. And he was it was kind of scary, kind of creepy, but also very impressive as well. He appeared to be a person of destiny. And so he placed those messages beneath the obelisk that says Mussolini on it to the sun god. And Jacob was represented by the sun in the Old Testament. And this has been long enough. God bless you.